What they found in George Benson's house will leave you shocked. It was supposed to be just another estate appraisal, but what investigators found inside George Benson's mansion stunned even the most seasoned professionals. Behind gold records and Grammys was something else, something that had been hidden for decades. Why had Benson kept this secret buried so meticulously for so long, and why did everyone around him seem determined to forget it? Let's go back to the beginning. George Benson's story did not begin on stage. It began in a two-room apartment in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, where poverty was a given and survival was a rhythm. Raised by a single mother who worked nights and prayed days, young George learned early that life owed him nothing. His earliest memories weren't of music halls or rehearsals, they were of empty cupboards, secondhand shoes, and a neighborhood that moved to the sound of sirens and sermons. His escape came in the form of a cheap ukulele bought from a corner pawn shop. It wasn't much, 4 strings, warped wood, but in George's hands, it became sacred. He played on stoops, outside barbershops, even inside smoky bars too dangerous for a child to linger. By 8, he was earning change. By 10, he was playing in clubs. By 14, he was navigating 2 lives, one as a child prodigy, the other as a boy still trying to make sense of abandonment, race, and silence. The silence stuck. He learned to hold things in, to smooth over hurt with melody. When Jack McDuff took him on tour at 19, George saw what the music world really was. Contracts that gave away rights, backroom deals that funneled royalties to strangers, and older musicians who drank away their pain. George chose a different path. He watched, he listened, and he began to build a wall around his world. By the time he signed his first major label deal, he was already hiding things. Bank accounts, unused compositions, even entire sessions no one knew he'd recorded. Why? Some say it was control. Others say it was fear. But buried inside this pattern was the first secret, the one that would later open a door no one dared to touch. When George Benson released Breezin' in 1976, it didn't just sell. It detonated. The album fused jazz improvisation with R&B warmth and easy listening smoothness, creating a new genre space that critics didn't know how to label. The public, however, didn't hesitate. They bought millions. They screamed his name. They declared him a crossover genius. And just like that, George Benson became something rare, a jazz guitarist who could fill arenas. But success is never clean. While the world embraced his velvet voice and melodic phrasing, jazz purists called him a sellout. He'd abandoned the complex improvisations of his early work for radio-friendly nonsense, one critic wrote. Behind the curtain, George ignored it all, or at least he tried. The truth was, he'd learned how disposable even talent could be. The moment you stopped selling, they stopped listening. And Benson had no intention of disappearing. To keep ahead, he diversified. He bought properties in several states. He invested in silent business partnerships. He quietly funded church initiatives and community programs, but never in his name. This wasn't modesty. It was distance, a way to stay above scrutiny. Those closest to him noticed a change. He became less available. He traveled with security. He avoided impromptu interviews. And slowly, stories began to swirl. An engineer recalled being dismissed mid-session after asking about an unreleased track that wasn't on the schedule. A former driver claimed he was asked to deliver packages to addresses that later turned out to be vacant lots. Still, Benson smiled on stage. He crooned under the lights. And nobody asked too many questions, because who questions a legend? The mask, however, was beginning to crack. There were whispers of something kept hidden in the mansion, something he refused to explain. And behind every chord he played, there was a silence growing louder. By the time George Benson signed his Las Vegas residency in the late 1980s, he was more than a musician. He was a symbol, a clean-cut, tuxedoed virtuoso who played jazz like silk and moved like water. Vegas adored him. He brought elegance to the Strip, packing theaters with both high-rolling tourists and local jazz disciples. But behind the dazzling lights and champagne suites, deals were being made. And they weren't all legal. Sources close to Benson's camp say the residency was partially negotiated through intermediaries not officially connected to the casino. These weren't talent agents, they were facilitators. Some had histories in organized crime. Others had connections to real estate empires with shell companies in the Caribbean. George's cut was clean on paper, but off the books, there were layers. Security increased. Personal assistants were vetted by private investigators. Benson's team traveled with encrypted phones, a rarity at the time. A hotel concierge was allegedly fired for entering his suite unannounced. When asked later, she said, "It wasn't a room, it was a bunker." A pattern emerged: cash deposits, rapid withdrawals, art purchases never declared. A former financial manager tried to raise concerns. Weeks later, he was gone. Resigned, unreachable, his name quietly scrubbed from tour documentation. One venue technician claimed he saw Benson arguing with a man in a tailored suit backstage. Something about wrong routing numbers and a delay in Geneva. And still, the shows went on, smooth as ever. It wasn't until the mansion's power failed in 2018 that any of this was reconsidered. A city technician, called to inspect a faulty generator, noticed something strange: a sealed door in the basement with reinforced steel and a keypad entry system. The technician was told to ignore it. He didn't. And what he reported started a quiet investigation, one that would lead to the unsealing of the mansion. The door was unassuming at first, nestled in the back corner of Benson's sprawling 12,000-square-foot estate. Unlike the rest of the home, which was filled with awards, antiques, and soft jazz playing through discreet speakers, this hallway was cold, dim, and silent. There were no photos, no decor, just concrete and darkness. The technician, under orders to inspect the backup generator, had to pass through this hallway. What caught his attention wasn't the door itself, but the biometric scanner next to it. Retinal and thumbprint access. Not even Benson's personal chef, who'd worked in the house for over 15 years, knew it existed. Days later, the utility company filed an unusual report: potential unauthorized power rerouting within a private residence. Normally, this would have gone nowhere, but Benson had quietly been under review by a federal agency. Not for tax fraud, but for something far more obscure: cultural asset mismanagement, unreported art, missing historical documents, even rumored possession of items banned from international trade. A quiet search warrant was drawn. What they found behind the door wasn't just shocking, it was historic. Inside the hidden room was a climate-controlled archive of unregistered artworks, some believed to have been missing since the 1970s. Rare jazz recordings, reel-to-reel tapes from dead legends, never released. A stack of unsent letters from a prominent civil rights leader. And one file marked VOC, contents sealed in wax. No one, not even his legal team, could explain how Benson came into possession of these items. The file alone contained material implicating multiple public figures in 1970s surveillance schemes. It wasn't just a vault, it was leverage. And Benson, the man of melody and grace, had kept it secret for over 40 years. But the real question now wasn't what was in the room. It was, who had he protected, and who had he silenced? Word of the hidden vault spread quietly at first, among law clerks, federal agents, and jazz historians, but it didn't stay hidden for long. Once a leaked inventory hit a private music collectors forum, the floodgates opened. Everyone wanted to know, how had George Benson, a man known for ballads and bebop, become a keeper of forgotten American relics? Theories bloomed overnight. Some claimed Benson had been approached in the 70s by Black Panther members looking for a safe place to store politically sensitive materials. Others believed he'd acquired them during overseas tours, where art trafficking was less scrutinized. A handful whispered about hush deals with estates of dead musicians, deals that ensured Benson held their unreleased works in perpetuity. In the vault were handwritten scores by John Coltrane, journals allegedly belonging to Miles Davis, even a voice recording labeled SS Confidential that experts later identified as Sarah Vaughan, discussing FBI intimidation during the McCarthy era. None of it had ever been cataloged. Benson, when finally reached through his lawyer, gave a single statement: preservation is not theft. Silence is not deception. But the silence around him was cracking. Museums demanded answers. Families of late musicians began legal inquiries. Cultural institutions debated whether to shame or thank him. Meanwhile, Benson stopped appearing in public. No interviews, no performances, no statements. His house remained guarded. Friends who once praised his genius now struggled to explain his choices. What did he intend to do with all of it? Was he protecting history or hoarding power? And why? Did the letters in the VOC file mention names that were still alive? The VOC file, labeled in simple block letters, turned out to be the most disturbing piece in the vault. Not for what it revealed about Benson, but for what it exposed about others. Inside were dozens of pages, typed transcripts, surveillance photos, cassette tapes, and official-looking memos dated between 1969 and 1982. They documented a covert initiative known as Voice of Control, allegedly a joint effort between music executives and federal operatives to monitor and suppress politically influential black artists. According to the papers, George Benson was never a target. He was a participant. He had been recruited in 1971, the files suggested, as a cultural intermediary, someone whose clean image and rising fame could act as a calming force, while other, more radical voices were systematically dismantled. There were references to meetings in Los Angeles, code names, payments made in art and property. One memo referred to Benson's house as a Tier 3 safe vault. Most damning of all, a signed confidentiality agreement bearing his real signature, alongside dates that matched his Las Vegas residency. It painted a picture not just of complicity, but of careful orchestration. Former collaborators were stunned. Herbie Hancock reportedly cut off contact. Quincy Jones refused comment. One musician who once shared a stage with Benson said, "If this is true, we were all playing for the wrong team." And Benson? He remained silent. As the contents of the VOC file slowly trickled into public awareness, the consequences were swift and devastating. Names appeared in those pages that hadn't been spoken in decades. Artists who had vanished mysteriously. Promoters who died in unexplained car crashes. Session musicians blacklisted overnight. What had once looked like a series of unfortunate coincidences across the music industry now began to resemble something more orchestrated and far more sinister. Among the names was Quincy June Archer, a saxophonist who vanished in 1974 after publicly accusing his record label of censorship and royalties theft. At the time, no one took him seriously. His disappearance was chalked up to mental instability, drugs, or both. But the VOC file included a memo stamped "Intercepted, Classified," detailing Archer's location just days before he vanished, signed off by a corporate executive who had later become a close associate of Benson. There was also mention of Denise Coles, a backing vocalist for several Motown acts who died of an alleged overdose in 1979. The autopsy report had inconsistencies. Benson's name appeared in her diary, scrawled in increasingly erratic handwriting, with one chilling line underlined 3 times. "He knows what they did to me." As these stories resurfaced, Benson's silence became more damning. People demanded clarity. Survivors' families wanted justice. But all they got were locked gates and a press statement from Benson's legal team claiming that the items in question were acquired through private estate sales and are not indicative of any wrongdoing. But who sold him these documents? And more importantly, why would someone want to preserve this history in secret rather than expose it? Benson's mansion had become more than a home. It was a mausoleum of buried voices. On a cold January morning in 2020, the knock finally came. It wasn't a raid, not exactly. It was a quiet arrival. 3 unmarked vehicles, 6 plainclothes agents, and a sealed federal warrant. The neighborhood was silent. The media hadn't caught wind. And yet, something felt final about it, as if a curtain was about to be drawn, not just on George Benson's legacy, but on an entire hidden era of American music. Inside the mansion, they found more than what the first vault had revealed. There was a second room, accessed through a false wall in the wine cellar, only discoverable after following a series of old architectural plans. In it, there were banker's boxes lined wall to wall. Many were labeled only by year, 1975, 1979, 1981. Their contents? Private correspondences, unreleased audio interviews, tapes of phone calls. Not all of them were Benson's. One tape marked MD Conef, "Do not play," was later verified as a phone conversation between Miles Davis and a high-level record executive, discussing surveillance rumors and racial profiling in artist contracts. Another contained what appeared to be Nina Simone, warning someone about being watched through the music. These weren't just artifacts, they were receipts. Receipts of a system many had whispered about, but few could prove. Outside, reporters began to gather. Drones buzzed overhead. Word had leaked. The home was now a crime scene, not for murder, but for memory, for the kind of truth people were never supposed to find. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as Benson, now frail and gaunt, was escorted outside, not in cuffs, but in silence. He didn't speak. He didn't look up. One photographer captured a single frame of him glancing back at the house. It looked like grief, or guilt, or maybe both. The world didn't wait for the courts. They never do. By the time federal officials confirmed an ongoing investigation into George Benson's possession of unauthorized government documents and stolen cultural artifacts, the media had already decided the verdict. Jazz Judas, one headline read. Smooth criminal, mocked another. Cable news ran dramatic reenactments of Benson in dimly lit rooms, supposedly plotting with spooks and record execs. Streaming platforms rushed to greenlight documentaries. Music historians scrambled to recontextualize everything, from Breezin' to In Your Eyes. Online, fans were torn. Some swore he was a guardian of suppressed history. Others called him a traitor to the very culture he once elevated. But the trial itself, if one could call it that, was anything but simple. The government was hesitant. Most of the documents Benson possessed had likely been stolen, yes, but pressing charges meant admitting those files were real, that the surveillance of black artists was more expansive than anyone had dared imagine, that the government, in tandem with corporate interests, had manipulated the trajectory of American culture from behind the curtain. And Benson? He remained unreadable. His legal defense argued he had inherited most of the items legally, through estate acquisitions and private collections, that he had no obligation to reveal their existence unless subpoenaed, and that, in some cases, he had protected the legacies of artists whose works would have otherwise been lost to time. It worked, partially. He wasn't charged with theft, but a settlement was reached. Several hundred items were surrendered to the Library of Congress. Others returned to families, and a select few were sealed indefinitely. Location undisclosed. In public, George Benson was never seen again. He disappeared into a kind of living exile, his name now synonymous with secrecy, betrayal, and brilliance. But the final reckoning was yet to come. Today, George Benson's music still plays, on jazz stations, in hotel lobbies, in quiet family kitchens. But it no longer floats innocently through the air. It lingers, heavy, like a question left unanswered, like a story only half told. What remains of his legacy is in conflict. To some, he is still a virtuoso, the bridge between jazz and pop, a master of melody who brought joy to millions. To others, he is a symbol of compromise, a man who traded truth for comfort, who preserved a dark chapter of cultural history not to illuminate it, but to control it. Academics are still parsing through the documents. Some are restricted by court order. Others have already reshaped the timeline of modern music. High-profile producers have gone silent. Former label executives are lawyering up, and a new generation of artists, many of whom cite Benson as an influence, are grappling with the moral cost of his choices. There are no statues of him, no planned tributes. His Grammy plaques were quietly removed from one exhibit. His name was taken off a jazz festival he helped fund, but his albums still sell. His recordings still haunt. And the house, the mansion in New Jersey, remains empty. It is now owned by a trust. No one lives there, but the lights are sometimes seen flickering on at night, as if the house itself refuses to forget what it witnessed. And maybe that's the truth George Benson left behind. A man who mastered sound only to be undone by silence. The discovery inside George Benson's home was more than just music. It was a window into a secret life. Now, the fight over what to do with it rages on. Should the vault be opened, or was it never ours to hear? Subscribe for more buried truths, and let us know what should be done with a genius's silence.